Hi, hello. Welcome to Man with a Mentor. I am the man, your host, Matthew Barnard. And you may be wondering what a show called Man with a Mentor is about. And basically, it's about people who have a desire and they find it when they're little or young people and they want to pursue that passion, and they do until they get it. And today, I have someone here who totally fits that bill, and his name is Phillip Roberts. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Happy to be here.
Phillip Roberts is a performer and composer with a penchant for music theory, from peacefully ambient to rhythmically driving, with touches of inspiration from places he's lived, including Virginia and Appalachian influences, to Southwest Ohio, one of the birthplaces of funk. Let's hear about something that you're doing right now.
Okay.
Let's talk about your group, Trio Aperitif, featuring Annette Meisner, who you're involved with.
Annette Meisner's my partner.
Oh,
Goes by Annie. By the way, you can also call me Phil. We both shorten our names sometimes.
Right.
And she uses she or they pronouns, so if I switch back and forth, that's why.
Right.
But Annie has played violin since a child, and we met at Interlochen, which we might talk about a little bit later.
Right.
And now we are happy to be able to perform together whenever we get the chance.
Right.
And we're introduced via, I play organ at a church in Oxford, Ohio, Holy Trinity Episcopal.
Right.
And they introduced us to Michael Ronstadt, who is a local cellist, and he does everything from folk to pop to classical. He might get some of those genes from his aunt, Linda Ronstadt, who is, of course, sort of well-known in the popular music scene.
Right. For like 50 years.
Well, yeah.
Amazing. Like
I know.
one of the, I think, true geniuses out there, able to sing big band and Mexican and blues and everything. Like, she's done it all.
And with us, we do a lot of classical stuff, but if you listen to my stuff, it's got a lot of influence from the Appalachian and the funk.
All right. Now, like, was it your idea to form this? Like, when you form a band, how much of it is like your idea and how much of it becomes like the group's idea? Or how do you not get like lost in it?
Well, that's a good point. It was actually the idea of Sarah Michael, who is one of the people who co-founded the Red Door concert series, also in Oxford, Ohio. I'm on the committee for the concert series, and she suggested that we do this concert with Michael. After that, though, it was sort of the fact that we worked together so well, and we all agreed that we enjoyed working together, that we just kept doing it, and we're on our third or fourth concert now, and might actually record a CD together in the near future.
Let's go back to when you were just a little Phil.
Sure.
Like, when did music like hit you, and how did it happen, and who and how and the where?
Well, it was really when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My parents had a piano in the house, so the option to play was always at my fingertips, if you will. And believe it or not, the first song I ever identified with was Puff the Magic Dragon. It spoke to me as a kid. Right. And I went to the piano, and there was a key that kind of had a dent in it, and I remembered that key was where I could start and try to figure out the melody to Puff the Magic Dragon. And so by ear, I just sort of pounded out, dun, 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 and kept going with it.
Right.
And from there, I just got really into it.
Oh, gotcha. Now, how did you segue that into like practicing and schoolwork and everything? Like, who kind of sat you down?
Well,
they didn't tie you down to the piano, but how did you figure out like how much time to devote, and whether like it was going to be, because some kids like they bang on a piano for 2 years and then they go and move to soccer or gymnastics or this or that, and it was hobby for a bit, but it clearly like wasn't a hobby for you. It became like the thing.
Well, that is a good question, because it was the fact that I just had kind of a natural, innate passion for it, maybe. My dad played the guitar, but they were great enjoyers of music and listened to a lot of classic rock, musical theater, that sort of thing, but were not musicians by career. So it was really the fact that I started teaching myself theory from the a few books that we had that my parents put me in piano lessons. And I really took to it, and I liked the repertoire I was playing. And when I went to see things like the Nutcracker or later on operas like Carmen, that was kind of the music that spoke to me, that got me into the concert music world.
All right. Was there any like hesitation as you were growing up? Like, I love music, but was I going to turn into that guy playing the violin underneath the subway, like for change? Or, did you have a path where you thought I can be successful at this? Did you have apprehensions or fears, or were you just like, I don't care, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, well, I certainly did have a few. Actually, it's funny you mentioned the thing earlier about the 2 years, because after about my first 2 years of the piano, I took a little bit of a hiatus, but it called me back eventually. And then later on, I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do for a career, but I knew my passion was really music. By the time I was a senior in high school, I knew that was the way for me, specifically as a composer. Even though I played the piano, I always knew that I wanted to write music, and it was something that I always did in between practicing. I would practice, but I would also spend a lot of time just playing with the instrument and writing music. And I think that even if you don't end up becoming a composer, it's a really important thing for aspiring musicians to do. I wanted to devote all of my practicing time to piano and composing, and what I did that I didn't have to invest in another instrument was singing. So I joined choirs, and I sang all the way from middle school up through high school, name it. I did show choir, I did chamber choir, madrigals, all that sort of thing. I recommend anybody that's interested in it just go into singing, because it's one of the joys of life. And even if you start out by learning by rote with singing, listening to what you hear and then singing it back, eventually you'll start to connect the dots with the written music.
Right. Now let's talk about, just kind of in general, about like getting gigs, like finding opportunities. Like, do you go out and do things for yourself and create things for yourself, or are you at a point where people are like, oh, I know Phillip and he'd be great at this, or like, do the people pull you in, or you do pull other people in, or how does it work?
It's a little bit of both, and I think it starts out more with you finding your own stuff, and then as you go on, you might work really hard for a while, and as you go on, people start to come to you for some opportunities. When I first graduated from university, I was finished my musical studies, I basically did what I call Frankensteining a career together. I was playing for the Cincinnati Ballet. I was crooning in nursing homes, singing and playing all the oldies. I was playing organ at churches, directing the choirs, that sort of thing. And I was adjuncting. I was teaching adjunct at Miami University. So, as well as teaching at Interlochen in the summers, a lot of different jobs altogether. As far as the gigs are concerned, I generally said yes to all of the gigs because, it would give me more performance opportunities, and that was fun. I played with a funk rock band for a while that was called Fox Sox, and it was, I got to do that side of things. Then I get to do the classical side of things with my trio aperitif and everything. So I tried to make all the gigs I could and didn't have to turn that much down, honestly.
Let's talk about some of these projects that you've worked on.
Sure.
And the first one I want to talk about is I love Edgar Allan Poe, as everyone should, right?
Great literary icon.
Yeah, see, if I look out and tell people they should, they will.
That's when you're breaking the fourth wall.
Right, right. So I want to hear about Madeline Usher, and who is from The Fall of the House of Usher.
Yes.
And all that. So, which is an amazing book. Go read it. And I did it again. So tell me about that and how that came to you and or whatever.
Well, I'd always been really interested in Edgar Allan Poe, and I like the horror side of things. I also like kind of like the Americana side of things, partially because I'm into the musical, what was happening musically at the time. And actually in The House of Usher, he does reference a musical piece. He calls it Weber's Last Waltz. And that made it into the piece, actually, this waltz that I was able to find the music for. It actually wasn't by Weber, but they all thought it was. I should say Weber. It's pronounced Weber.
That's a
bad musician. Bad composer.
That's okay.
Your pronunciation.
I would say Weber. I wouldn't know.
In any case, back to the Fall of the House of Usher. Well, that's one of those timeless tales that sort of has a lot of metaphor to it, and there's a lot you can do with music and metaphor because it's just not always so literal. In fact, the house became a character as I wrote this operetta, I call it, and the house's character is completely depicted by musical motives. Well, I also wanted to give the story sort of a new angle because one of the things that, as great as Edgar Allan Poe was, there's still some dated elements in the fact that all of a lot of his works have a completely silent female character who happens to be dying. In this case, I wanted to actually give voice and the main voice in the form of all the arias to this titular female character, Madeline Usher.
Right.
So I used some of Roderick's lines and gave them to Madeline, but I also gave her her own lines about how she must have felt to be dying of this ailment, and ultimately, when she comes back from the grave, how she must have felt to have been interred alive.
But how did that whole project come to you? Did you have the idea and then say to somebody help me with this? Or was it somebody had the idea and said, Phillip, write this for me?
Yeah, that's a good question. It was actually, I wrote it during my master's studies, and you have to do a master's thesis. And so it's the fact that I was already passionate about Edgar Allan Poe's short stories that I decided to set this, and it was with the help of one of my mentors, Christopher Dietz, who was one of my teachers at composition instructors at Bowling Green State University, where I was at the time. That kind of has been done tons of times. In fact, there's 2 other operettas on The Fall of the House of Usher. One's by Philip Glass, one's by Claude Debussy.
Right.
So I wanted to
You're
do
in
something
good company, though. Let's talk about The Fountain and your work with the Interlochen Arts Camp and how that came about and what that is.
Okay, well, those are 2 different things. One of them that I did at Interlochen. So with The Fountain particularly, that's a piece for string quartet that has a history that kind of transverses that time I was talking about from when I was Little Phil up until the time that I was working at Interlochen. That string quartet I actually started writing the motives of in high school. And it's very rare. In fact, I recommend to my composition students, don't do this. Don't take your old ideas and try to make them new as much as try to make something new, because sometimes you'll come up with something fresh that you might not have come up with back then. But there are certainly exceptions. If I take a motive from here or there that I might have written when I was younger, and then I shape it in my modern language, then I think it can work out. So that's how the Fountain String Quartet, the whole thing is called The Fountain of Youth, and it's 3 movements. And the first movement is about the voyage to the Fountain of Youth.
All right.
The second movement is about reaching the Fountain of Youth and beholding it in all its grandeur. And the third movement is ultimately about deciding not to drink from it, that it was about the journey the whole time and just returning home.
Let's talk about neurodiversity and your involvement with Cincinnati Ballet Moves and the Links Project.
Okay. Well, it's something that is a passion of mine with all of my music and art, is that I represent those who are underrepresented in today's society or marginalized by it. And so one of those communities can be the neurodivergent community. And back about 5 or 7 years ago, when I was working at the Cincinnati Ballet, as I mentioned earlier, and I was playing mostly for repertoire classes, well, an opportunity became available to collaborate with Julie Sunderland. She's one of their sort of organizers at the ballet, and she actually got this class together in conjunction with the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, which was a dance class catered towards individuals with developmental disabilities. The majority of the students were either students with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy, and my role in all of this was to play the piano in a very improvisatory fashion. In fact, a lot of these improvisations were not unlike just composing at a sped up rate, and to incorporate musical cues that then the dancers would interpret and dance to.
I've recently done another episode of Man with a Mentor where I talked to Marlene Sharp and Judy Utall, who are working with an organization in Los Angeles called autismandentertainment.org, and trying to get more autistic people that are on the spectrum more work, because they have a lot of the creative skills, but a lot of them are having problems with social awkwardness in terms
Sure.
of like networking or getting interviews and all that. Like, so that's been a great.
That's interesting because that kind of ties into the Links project that I was also working with, and they are particularly their overall goal is to represent diversity in art song. It's a group founded by a lot of singers in Chicago, and I collaborated with Caitlin Kahn on a project whereby my composition students would set to music poems by autistic individuals who are primarily non-speaking.
Oh, gotcha.
So yeah, that's kind of how I've worked with the autistic community.
Oh, nice.
And these were just a fantastic set of poems. They've sourced them from all over the United States, actually. Lots of poets who were all probably between the grades of like 5th grade and 12th grades. They were all children with autism. And they wrote these poems that my students then, took and they set so that our voice students at Miami University could sing them. And so Allison Acord is who I worked with to find the voice students. So this is many people, many moving parts, and we had this wonderful concert, and we plan to reprise it and continue with this endeavor.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, look up autismandentertainment.org. 'Cause
Okay.
if you're doing things like on that level, like they might love to talk to you and like promote what you're doing, and you can promote what they're doing. And let's talk about social media.
Well, and look into the Links project. I don't know what their website is, but look it up on Google.
Right. Yes, do that. Let's talk about social media for a second. Like, how do people find you? Do people like look you up, and or do you just use it as a outlet to promote your own stuff? How do you look at it?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, at some point I was not having that much of my music online because I just do so much of it live, until one of my actual composition students came up to me. And of course, this is a student I've worked with for years who we have a good rapport one day. And he says, Dr. Roberts, I feel like you have a bad online presence. And I said, I give them both constructive and type of criticism on their music, so I'm also willing to take it when it's due, and I kind of worked on it a little bit, and so now you can find me on SoundCloud, Instagram, YouTube, a lot of the regular spaces, and I try, and I hope to in the future.
Do you want to plug any of those, like specifically? Like, I don't know if you have a YouTube channel or your own website, or state what those are.
PhillipRobertsmusic.com. That's my main website. And that you will find links to all of the other things I told you on there, the buttons for Instagram, for YouTube, that sort of thing. But if you look up Phillip Roberts Music on YouTube, you'll find it as well.
How would you describe yourself as a teacher in terms of like letting people like experiment? Are you like real rigid in what you do, or do you start with basic technique? Do you teach composing also, or like how do you fold it all together?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I'm a professor of both composition and music theory at Miami University, and I really do enjoy the fact that I can teach both as sort of separate topics, because it would be really hard to do them both with just your composition lessons, your one-on-one lessons. So in theory, that's much more kind of the objective, versus subjective. It's the objective material, this is how music, how notes work, how things go together with chords and how you do it. But then the subjective element that I get to teach is the composition lessons, one-on-one lessons that I have with the composers. And those are where I encourage freedom and I encourage exploration. Of course, I do that in my theory classes as well. But when a student is writing their own music, that's a much more subjective thing. I will work with them with whatever their style is. I don't prescribe my style on anyone. But I love with both of these things that I teach, theory and composition, when students have these moments of discovery where they really figure something out for themselves and it feels like it's come from their own internal being, and that they then feel that much more connected to the subject matter and inspired for even when they're no longer in my class to go forth and continue investigating and learning about it.
Right. Do you feel like a mentor, like to people, or do people
certainly
come to you like 5 years after they left you and say like, look, I'm here now, or I wrote this, and I'm in the second chair of the something, or like,
Oh,
you know,
yes.
did people come back to you and say like, thank you?
Well, I think they do, and I've got a lot of them who have actually become teachers, and so they might reach out to me not only to say thank you, but also to ask me, hey, can you send me the slides for when you taught the 7 fully diminished 7 chords or something, and I'll send them some of my material.
Now, did you have someone that you can point to who really made a drastic impression on either your music or your composing? Somebody you want to give a shout out to, like, thank you, you transformed my playing or my thought process? Or
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The gentleman who I would say had the biggest influence on me is John Hilliard. And he was my first or second long-term composition teacher when I was at James Madison University in Virginia for my undergrad. And he was just a delightful hippie. You know, he had long hair, and he was very at one with everything. You know, he was someone who I aspired to be like, not only musically, but also overall, just the whole package. And very kind, understanding, generous with his time, patient person. And he's passed away by now. Well, I mean, he has. I remember when he did. But rest in peace to John Hilliard.
Oh.
But at the same time, I still carry on a lot of the values that he instilled in me.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just want to go over what those plugs were for yourself in terms of where people can find your music. Sure. Tell people, and then we'll wrap things up so people can find your music, because I want people to like hear what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, thank you. Okay, so my main website is www.philliprobertsmusic.com, and remember, that's Philip with 2 L's. And then I also have a SoundCloud, Philip Roberts Composer, and a YouTube channel where a lot of my recordings and videos of my stuff are posted and will continue to be posted. And if we end up going through with this True Aperitif CD, then that'll be on Spotify.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like put it on Apple Music? Or
I would do that as well, yeah, if we did.
All right. Thank you, Philip, for being my guest.
It's a pleasure.
This is Philip Roberts, and we are going to say goodbye, and thank you for listening to another episode of Man with a Mentor. Thank you.